Yes, exactly. And actually, I'm so glad you said that because this ties well into the next subject. Which, first of all, everybody, I'm really enjoying this. We're already like an hour and a half. There's no way we're going to get through the rest of the subjects in a decent amount of time. But I do appreciate y'all's contributions so far, and I'm glad that this is the first time that we're doing this. Is that there's still a decent amount of chemistry and people being able to make a contribution on each topic. The next thing I wanted to move on to is animal people. So there are people who call themselves dog people or cat people, or i.e. the people who say that I care more about animals or I have greater empathy for animals than people.
Oh, I 100% thought you were talking about furries. My bad.
Oh.
I was like, hey, most of them are nice.
I would. Yeah, no,
not my thing, but I did. A lot of them are really nice and polite, and fursuits are expensive.
Yeah, I have no problems with furries, and it's an interesting subculture, but I have no beef with them.
Okay,
but
you're talking more like PETA stuff.
PETA, or not even, it's not even always just PETA. It's because PETA, anybody can recognize PETA as a problem, but more so just like everyday people who are just like, oh, I care more about my dogs, or I would save my dog before I save a human being, or like, how people will say that like, oh, there was a homeless person, I didn't, give a fuck about them, but they had a dog with them, and then, people do these different things, and it's just like after a while, it's kind of like I can't look at it as just a joke. I really start to think that like, people, really do care about their animals more than other human beings. And let me just go in and say, give the caveat that I understand that, for some people, maybe their experience with other human beings has largely been traumatic and negative, and I'm not going to tell somebody that their experience is invalid or whatever. But I'm just going to say is that if you espouse that point of view, then just understand, if I see your ass drowning or if I see your ass in a fucking serious predicament, then I'm not going to fucking help you, because I don't torture animals. I don't fuck with animals. Even I don't consider myself an animal person. It's like I don't, believe in torturing animals. I don't wear fur, even though I wouldn't tell somebody to not wear fur. But it's like, I view human life in general as just having a certain amount of value, even if you are a piece of shit. Like, you'd have to really be a disgusting human being for me to prioritize an animal over that human being. Because for one thing, it's so easy. Or actually, no. Before I get into those, I don't want to dive too deep and just run my mouth. What are y'all's thoughts? And just from your history, or just from your, what are your thoughts on that, folks? We'll start with you, Adam.
It's such a huge topic. Yeah, it's not the first time I've ever heard that, like, oh, like that homeless person has a dog, I'm gonna give that person, a few more bucks or whatever. But if it was anybody else that didn't have a pet or whatever, then they just keep on walking. But it's all personal preference. It's just, I don't know. It's I don't know how to. Let me see what other people's preferences are. It's interesting. I never really thought about it. Yeah, like people are like pet, they treat their pet as like a human being. Yeah, it's alive, and as long as it's not, they just, yeah. Let's hear somebody else's point of view on it.
What about you, Christine?
I'm guilty. I'm one of those guilty parties that love their animals dearly, but that doesn't mean I put an animal over a human being. Mm-hmm. I have 3 dogs. My whole life I've actually grew up around animals. So whether it be a dog, a cat, a bird, a fish, I've had it. Except for a reptile or a snake. I don't touch those. Right. But that is a tricky. It's a little bit of a tricky topic, to bring about. If you're a pet, but I would say we would respect both, animals and humans. I respect both, because in ways that how you brought up about if you had a traumatic background. Yeah, I've had some situations with some people, in my past. I'm not going to lie about that. And, you look for comfort, and, your animal, your pet's always near by you. They provide you that comfort,
mm-hmm.
But, a pet, they're to me, I treat my pets like my baby. They're like my babies. But, there's only so much a pet can do.
Mm-hmm.
They may provide that comfort. But, that's my opinion about the pets.
Yeah, because go ahead.
Oh, no, you can go ahead.
Somebody else was about to chime in. Was that Adam?
Okay. Yeah, A while back, I remember there was this Instagrammer that she had a Siberian Husky, and the poor thing. I think she was only like 3 years old, but she had cancer. But yeah, she started a GoFundMe account for the thing to go through chemo and the whole process of treatment. And sadly, the poor thing didn't make it. But I've heard stories of people go through great lengths that, like, when their dog is on the brink of life and death, that they'll invest as much as they can, to save that animal. I mean, for me, it's just like, it depends. I mean, like, I have 2 Doberman pinchers, and like, I love them dearly, but I mean, if it ever came down to that circumstance that, like, they, young and, they had cancer, I mean, there's only, it's just it's just personal preference. I mean, you gotta do what's best for yourself, that it doesn't financially, ruin you. But I mean, it's just
yeah. Because the thing is, like, the main sticking point that I want to bring up, and then we'll pass it on to Dill, is that, like Christine mentioned, is that there's only so much that an animal can give you. Is that 2 things. First of all, we bred dogs. 98% of dogs that fucking exist, we purposefully bred them to serve us, basically. Yeah. Whether it's to watch over, whether it's to hunt or to, guard us while we're, engaged in other activities and stuff, fight other animals or, people and stuff. So it's like we purposefully bred them. They are utility. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like a tool. Like we made them to use as a fucking tool. But then secondly, because animals, we don't engage with them. We can't communicate with them in the same way that we communicate with one another. It's easy to project, certain things on them. Like if you see a dog, like they don't know if they're smiling, but the way that they, react to shit and what we, our understanding of emotions and expression and everything, we look at, oh, the dog is smiling, or like the dog is, the cat is, so selfish, or, so blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, these animals are just what they are. They're not able to, tell you what they're thinking and be able to communicate with you in the same complexity or abstraction that a human being can. And so that's what always kind of frustrates me about that, is that, like, on one hand, yeah, I get that, like, there's a certain comfort that you get from interacting with an animal that you don't get from human beings, but also think about what is that level of interaction you have with an animal. You're interacting with something that was bred, first of all, to satisfy you, whereas human beings, every human being is not here to make you happy, and they're under no obligation to. And then secondly, this animal can never return the same level of, expressions and it's basically like how people think they have a relationship with their favorite social media figure, the parasocial relationship. It's like the same thing with animals. You know what I'm saying? You're always going to feel like you have this connection with it, but it can never be returned to any degree, inherently. But what are your thoughts on that, Bill?
I've got a lot. The main one, the immediate thought that popped into my head when you brought up the topic was how much money was thrown down for Australian wildlife versus how much money is thrown down for Flint.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So stuff like that. There's stuff like that because it's the idea of like having that hierarchy is pretty fucked up. I see both sides, right? So primarily, I'm just out and say it. Primarily, my beliefs line up with what you were saying, Brandon, where I value human life much more. But I've at least I've been able to empathize with the mentality of pet owners. Because a big part of it is pets versus humans, or animals in general versus humans, is there's an inherent the good and bad of animals is that there's really no morality involved. They don't, for better or for worse. So you won't have like an evil animal. It might not necessarily have like a good one either, but you're not going to have like a dog that's plotting to betray you, And I think there's that purity involved with pets and with animals and people. I think that people gravitate towards because they know they can get that from animals, whereas humans, it's rare or unheard of, for better or for worse, and there's that connection. And in some ways, animals too are somewhat surrogates for those sorts of relationships. The term fur babies, as much as everybody wants to make fun of it, like I've come around to a lot of that sort of thinking because my twin brother has cats, and like he's explained a lot of this to me in vivid detail, like how it's on you, like this creature is depending on you, like it'll die if you don't take care of it, and so there's that, when something is depending on you, there's that emotional connection involved. So like I can get, you know, I can get it, but that wildfire thing pissed me off so much.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, and you know, examples of that abound. You know, whether it's you know, whether it's you know, money being prioritized for like wildlife reservations, which I mean I do think that's important, but then when you also have like issues with homelessness or issues with, you know, huge economic disparity and blah 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 blah, it's like, okay, this is a situation. This is where it's like, okay, clearly you look at certain people as deserving certain basic human or access to resources or whatever, and other people as not deserving.
So like slight, I'm sorry to interrupt, but slight, like, I don't want to say like counter or even devil's advocate, but the thing to consider in all of this is there's not like a real separation of, like, there's not city versus environment. It's all one. Without sounding too much like a hippie, I mean this literally. It's all one planet. And so, like, people mentally separate, like, so you give the example of, like, the wildlife preserve. Like, that biodiversity legitimately matters because all of this shit has to come from somewhere. So it's a balance, right? It's a balance.
Yeah, because, you know, like I said before, like, even though I don't wear fur, I wouldn't, you know, tell somebody else not to wear fur. Not because, you know, the only reason being is that, yeah, there's the, you know, way that fur is harvested, but there's also, you know, when you wear artificial fur or just artificial clothing and shit, there's so much chemicals and, you know, waste and exploitation that comes from that. Or, you know, people talk about, oh, I'm vegan, I don't eat any animals, you know, substances and shit. It's like, okay, but land still has to be grazed and allocated to grow resources to feed you. And, you know what I'm saying, it's just trading acres of grassland to feed cattle or, you know, to house chickens and livestock and shit for growing soybeans and you know, vegetables and shit like that. It's like, yeah, you can talk about lesser environmental impact, and even though I eat meat, it's like I do acknowledge the fact that the way that we consume and harvest meat is unsustainable and really immoral in many fashions. It's like okay, if you want to eat meat, I should be able to do that, and if I, you know, want to use a meatless substitute, I should be able to do that. But like, it's like, get off people's, you know, it's like it's giving people more, you know, choices in that respect. But it's you know, yeah, I guess you know, to say, of course, everything we can nuance any conversation to death, but really what I was just trying to get to is just nuance. But this basically the point I was just trying to get to is just get a, you know, a temperature check on where people, you know, just fall on the issue and why. And so it's just like, yes, while, you know, I don't like, you know, animals being abused, I don't like, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's like when I see people making posts about like, oh, they abused an animal, well, they deserve to die and shit, or that, like, to bring up an older example, like with Michael Vick, it's like, yeah, the stuff he did was horrendous, and, you know, he deserved to get jailed and fined and shit like that. And all those dogfighting, you know, motherfuckers. And then some people were just like, no, he should not be allowed to show his face in society. He should never be welcomed back. And, you know, saying he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame of football. It's like, look, the shit he did was horrendous, but that was in his, you know, civilian life, and he paid the price in his civilian life and had to take a seat from his professional career and shit. And so it's just like, you know, I mean, that's kind of weaving more into like cancel culture in general, and we can get to that. But just talking about how it's like, yeah, to a certain degree, people doing horrendous things. I err on the side of, for the most part, allowing people to redeem themselves, or to, and just erring on the side of prioritizing other human beings before animals. Even though I don't condone, you know what I'm saying, a lot of the shit, like whether it's doing makeup tests on animals, or the way the meat is harvested, or the, you know, factory farming and shit like that. and like animal fights and cockfighting and dog fighting and shit like that.
I think the reason that it's considered so heinous by so many people is the idea that these creatures can't really defend themselves. Like a human being would be able to self-advocate, but the creatures would not. You know?
True.
The thing is, the thing is that like people get killed by animals. It's like it's. And
same deal. They are amoral. They're animals.
Right, but here's the thing though, is that plenty of other human beings are being genocided or abused and in these fucked up situations and shit. And the same people.
It's not binary. I'm not. 100%. I'm not trying to. Like I said, I agree with you, and I put human beings on the higher pedestal here because we make art. But I've thought about this a lot, guys. I've thought about this for years.
Yeah. No. I'm not. The thing is, I'm not even saying that you're doing that. I'm really just explaining. I'm just really just trying to explain my views more. So it's not just like, humans are just better just because I'm saying they're more useful, or I can have inside jokes or whatever. I'm just trying to elaborate. I'm just trying to elaborate that. What was that?
I just said you're good, dude. For some reason I really felt the urge to play devil's advocate a little bit there.
There's no problem with that. I was just saying that I'm just like, it just gets frustrating because now is a time when we depend on our human relationships more than ever. So we're not going to get through this without the relationships we have with humans. And the thing is that I'm as somebody who's never really had pets, and has had to struggle with developing relationships with people, and finally getting into a time when I feel that it's the easiest for me to be able to do that. I'm just like, damn, like I understand. It's like on one hand, I understand how people who haven't been able to develop those relationships and develop those social skills and stuff, how they can feel like, they're too far gone or too far behind or too out of the loop to want to try to connect with people and just stick with their animals. I just feel like in the long run, there's a lot more value that we get out of the human relationships. It's kind of like just having more of a utilitarian perspective on it. But yeah, there's a lot of people who I share that emotional bond with, but most human beings I'm not going to have that bond with. They're just going to serve a function in my life, whether it's going about doing their jobs or just not bumping into me at the streets or, saying not coughing on food that I would like to purchase from the grocery store.
Hey, Samboy, actually, could I ask Christine a question?
Okay.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, like
sorry,
on this.
Spoke for Christine.
Well, I
permission to speak to Christine.
No, it's because you're like moderating. That's the only reason. Sorry, Christine. I'm not trying to. Anyway, the reason I was this talk about animals, since you said you're you've been a lifelong pet owner. It just I was curious if like these interactions with all these animals all the time have given you like extra perspective on human relationships, because both Brandon and I haven't. Brandon, you said that you haven't had any pets before, right?
Who's Brandon?
Samboy. I don't know why I keep bringing up this Brandon guy.
No, it's all because I keep me. I've been very inconsistent with my name.
I was good until I wasn't.
Yeah, it's all good.
We'll fix it in post. We'll fix it in post. That's right. No, but no, we had like a family dog when I was a kid, and I always wanted to own a rabbit, but I never actually committed to it. So we had a family dog, but even then I didn't interact with it too much. Okay. Anyway, so that point's gone. Whatever. Either way, I was curious, Christine. Just skip all of that. Just back to over here. If like I said, if having pets has given you any extra perspective.
Perspective, as in.
Like with dealing with people. Like I don't know. Does that question make sense?
More. Let me give more of an example perspective. I'm trying to think. I don't think it's affected me at all. Whether if I'm dealing with a pet or a dog, it really doesn't make really much of a change.
Okay.
So have there been no insights into how, say that you came home from a long day of work and everybody you interacted with has been kind of shitty or not really, considering Christine's needs. And then you get home to your pets or whatever, and just having something that lays in your lap, or just having something that just shows you joy, even though it's just at the prospect of being petted or being fed their favorite treat or food, it's still being approached with that, and then maybe that just provides the insight of like, damn, I wish that I had more people in my life, human beings, whom would just call in and check in on me, or that would just you know what I'm saying, ask me how I'm doing, or that's somebody who was just happy to see me or just happy to hear me. You know?
Right.
Has there been any of those kind of like insights about like interactions with pets and what it's made you think about your human relationships in that manner?
Oh, of course. I'm sure, I'm sure that if you, whether regardless if you're a pet owner or you like me, like I'm a pet owner, of course you'd kind of want that a little bit more of an interaction. If somebody would give you a call or, or message you, or like I said, of course, there's some days that are like that. And then there's some days that I'm okay with it,
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Okay, sweet. So, did you have any final thoughts on that, Adam, before we move on to the next subject, which hopefully I'll remember by the time you answered this question?
No, I'm pretty good.
God damn it!
I mean,
I needed you to stall.
Well, I mean, yeah, human interaction is super important, and like right now, like, it's hard. I mean, I feel like I've been making a little more effort calling people and seeing how they're doing, but I don't really get not really that much effort of people hitting me up.
Yeah.
But then again, like, maybe you do have to make the move of like actually hitting other people up, and then it reciprocates. Reciprocate?
Reciprocate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got
back
it, man.
and forth.
Yeah.
So, I hope this, during this whole process and everything that we're going through, that it actually does, give more understanding and more outreach to people. And like, I know a lot of people right now are I feel like it's, mentally it's affected me as well. But I mean, with like meditation and like trying to stay busy with music. But yeah, I mean, deep down, a lot of people right now are suffering mentally and, need somebody to reach out. And it could be you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it has been me. But actually, you know what? That's great, because I forgot the other topic that I wanted to discuss, but you brought up something else that I want to bring up, which is that no relationship is 50-50.
Yep.
And that this kind of actually ties back into like the leverage and power discussion, because it's like sometimes in order to get things done, you have to be willing to be that leader, and for people to look at you and be like, oh, who's this motherfucker think he is to call shots and shit? It's like, well, nobody else was, or the people who were doing it were doing a shittier job than me.
Ding 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 ding.
So then the same thing applies to like relationships. Like so like you said, sometimes you have to reach out to people first. And, there's a multitude of internal and external reasons. There have been a bunch of people, like, since this quarantine, who I've reached out to and hit up. And, some of them didn't hit back. Some of them hit back, but, it kind of failed. It kind of stopped immediately after the first couple of messages. And then there were other people who were kind of like, oh, wow, it was really great to actually, engage and realize that we can talk, saying more at length about stuff. And so it's like sometimes, depending on whatever traits that you have, like I said, in the last like several years, I've been discovering more of my extroverted side and learning how to socialize and just interact with, people and build up that rapport with strangers. And the thing that I have to be reminding myself of is that there are a lot of people who still haven't discovered that, or will never discover that. There are people who live their whole lives till old age and never really, learn how to develop their extroverted side or their highly social side. And so it's like, while on one hand I may get in my feelings and be like, damn, I feel like, I feel like it's a 70-30 relationship where 70% of the time I have to initiate things, and then, what they seem to return in favor is only 30% of it. But, once again, the thing I have to tell myself is like, okay, the question I have to ask myself is what you have to do. What I try to do in that situation, I think, is that, okay, I'm going to take a step back, or I'm going to say something different or do something different and see how they react. And like, if I pull back, will they inquire? Will they try to fill up that space? You know what I'm saying? And overtake that, space that I left? Or will they just continue to let it rot? Or will they at least inquire as to like, hey, you seem to have changed and blah, 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 and then kind of go from there. But it's like, like I have, different people in my life and shit who I'm like, I only see them a couple times a year. I only hear about them, every few months and shit. But it's like we're able to pick up from that time. And so it would be, it's very easy for me to be like, damn, I'm not getting, saying, damn, I wish they would have hit me back on this message, or damn, I wish they would have offered more to this conversation, or damn, I wish they would have, blah, 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 blah. But at a certain point, I'm just kind of like, you know what? If this is the most that I can get out of this individual, this 30%, then as long as it's not really stressing me out too much, or I don't feel like I'm being abused, it's like, whatever. Then whatever. I'll go with those terms of the relationship and just get this 30%. It's like, if I can't get the 70, 80% that I want, I'll at least get the 30 or 40%. And it's like, sometimes you have to be the one to take the charge and be willing to be like, all right, I'm the one that's giving more in this relationship, but it's like, you know what, I still ultimately want this thing to, I want to maintain this bond. And so, maybe it becomes more expensive. Maybe if it demands more input from me later on, I will, Adam just left the chat. Maybe that was a signal. Maybe he'll get back on. But yeah, I mean, y'all get the gist. So Christine, what are your thoughts on that? About sometimes in order to maintain a certain relationship or bond, you have to recognize that you're going to be contributing more to it than the others.
Wouldn't that kind of fall into compromise as well too, when it comes to 50-50 as well? But like,
compromise. The whole thing about compromise is that it's supposed to be about like, okay, we come to a 50-50, basically it's kind of in the same vein as that. But it's like sometimes you have to recognize that, okay, the compromise in this situation is me giving up 70 and them giving up 30, or vice versa, and that either accepting that as is, or throwing it away. Because some people will, because sometimes people will get into arguments or get into fights and disagreements and be like, we agree on these 10 or 12 things, but the 1 or 2 things we disagree on, we're going to completely throw out the whole fucking thing.
Right.
And it's like my attitude, like I said, is started to change from, canceling people in that manner, or thinking about like, oh, this thing upset me, so I'm just going to completely shut them out, and just recognizing, okay, these are the spaces and this is the degree to which I can engage with them, or these are the topics, or this is what this person is willing to contribute and willing to offer, whether for internal or external reasons, but that's what it is. And just kind of, and so it's less of like a compromise, like, because the compromise is kind of like, okay, we both kind of accept the fact that these are the terms, whereas what I'm describing is you just kind of recognizing that, oh, this is just what this person has to offer. So for example, one of my, like romantic partners, whom I rarely get to see because she was living out here for a while, but then she moved back to her hometown across the country. And so, we've seen each other a couple of times when we're in each other's states, but obviously it's not a regular thing. Now, I could just be upset and just be like, oh, okay, that was fun, or whatever, and just kind of let that just be a story or whatever. But it's like we still keep in contact, we still follow each other's posts and whatnot. And if we're still single and happen to see each other again, then shit will be popping. But it's just like, I don't have to stress about it. I'm not tripping over it. So it's like just recognizing that, okay, I'm only going to be able to get this much out of this bond, but that I still want to maintain that bond. Even if that's the most I can get out of it. So your thoughts on that?
True. I've been kind of stuck in that kind of a predicament too, but things just didn't work, and that you had to let it go. You had to let it go. This was like years ago. So, and it's true what you state. Sometimes the opposite person's gonna have to put more and more, and that's what I did. I tend to put more. I put more a long time ago, and yeah, it blew up.
Yeah.
Didn't work.
Yeah,
I mean, see what you mean by you can give or take, or like I said, or more person's gonna put more.
Right. Like you have of course there's a threshold, of your limit, and but the thing is just recognizing, okay, if you're okay with the terms of whatever. I just hit up Adam. Hopefully he'll maybe it's just his internet connection. Maybe he had to go to the bathroom again, but hopefully he gets back on the chat. But Dylan, your thoughts on that, on relationships or not, and not just like romantic relationships, but just the bonds that we have with other people in general are not 50-50.
Well, what you're talking about was 100% the entirety of my 20s. Like, right. Everything that you just described. And so, like, when I started out, like, as 18-year-old Dylan, I saw, my philosophy was, like, if I shake your hand and I learn your name, I consider you a friend. I was, like, really, really idealistic. And I made the mistake of thinking that everyone would give the same amount to any sort of relationship that I was giving. And long story short, I agree with both philosophies that it is 100% okay to just cut somebody out completely if they're just not bringing any sort of like positive contribution to your life. And I think the older I get, basically what you were saying, Brandon, is that to expect, as sad as this sounds, to be okay with expecting less from people. Like, yeah, I know that sounds fucked up, but like it's healthier, and you basically have to like have these mental thresholds for people. Mm-hmm. And I think where things get really, really messy is finding out where those are.
Yes, because you only learn through that experience. You only learn by offering, yourself up and either being rewarded with either being reciprocated or either being your actions being reciprocated or being ignored or being abused or, whatever. So it's like you have to actually go through that. But it's like that's what built, it's like you have to go through it. Like I was talking with one of my somebody who I was dating and we just recently, like in the last months before the pandemic and everything, we had been chatting again or whatever. And one of the things that she related is that because she was, we're both late bloomers, but she was even later. And one of the things that she mentioned was that because she had waited so long to start dating and developing romantic relationships and shit, a lot of the stuff that people had gone through in their teens and their early 20s, she was only discovering in her mid to late 20s.
Oh, yeah.
And so the thing is that like, yeah, maybe it was kind of and there's always a trade-off. So yeah, there's benefits to not getting tied down with that shit and the stuff that romantic relationships can entail during that time in our lives. The thing is that if you do eventually want that down the road, then you're gonna have to basically learn from scratch at a much later time in your life when you're much more set in your ways and when you have a much more finite idea of what it is that you want. And so maybe that's limiting. And so that limits the pool of potential partners and whatnot, because I'm somebody who was like the opposite of you, where I was very much like, it was more like self-sabotage, where I would look for any reason basically to not fuck with somebody or to decide that Adam's saying that his phone died and he can't use the computer because his somebody else is on it. So he'll check back in on 5. Maybe he'll be able to come back in or not. We'll see. But if y'all can still keep going, I probably still could go for at least another 45 minutes or an hour if y'all are still up for it. I know it's a lot, but the thing is, I'm probably still gonna edit, get 15-20 minutes. So it'll be, and plus I'll break them. The thing is, I'm gonna break them down into segments and stuff. Like I'll break them down into like 10, 12, or 15-minute segments and shit.
That's cool.
But the thing is, I just enjoy being able to chat with people and talk about these ideas. I don't get to, discuss these things very often.
Yeah.
But in any case, we'll try to keep it moving. You still there, Christine?
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right, awesome. But yeah, it's like me. I kind of had the opposite, where like I would self-sabotage and look for any reason to kind of like fuck this job and just walk away, or drop a class, or just walk away from interacting with somebody, and just kind of let myself just sit in that immediate emotional response of, oh well, fuck it. That's done and not do that. And some people, I've been able to repatch those bridges with and rebuild those bridges. But it's like looking back, I'm just like, God damn, like I threw away so many bonds and relationships and shit for no good reason, or walked away from shit, for no good reason. And it's like, yeah, on one hand, it was good to learn to do that. It's good to be able to have those traits and be able to learn when it's, when you're not being satisfied and you're doing things on terms that aren't, you don't want. But then it's like, after a while, you have to start to recognize, okay, how much of this is just me just being an asshole and just being demanding, or not really having a lot of perspective and experience, or not being able to see things outside my own perspective. And so like now from like my mid-20s onwards, it's kind of been like the opposite of like, kind of do more of just accepting the fact that, some people can only give so much, and just learning to accept that and not get so mired in my own feelings about it.
I mean, that sounds like that was the defense mechanism for you anyway, prevented you from getting too invested in too much?
Yeah, I mean it's that, and then it's that, but it was also like a hangover from certain behaviors I had as a kid. It's also just timidness and inexperience, and so it went from a time of me being able to quit things, whether it was Boy Scouts or being able to quit sports teams or quit, saying blah 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 when things weren't going my way or when I felt upset, as opposed to accepting the fact that you're going to be upset or be dissatisfied or have to do things, commit to things that you really don't want to do. And, once again, there's a threshold for that, and you kind of learn what your threshold is through trial and error. But it's like one of the things that I recognized afterwards was that some of that was just some of it was just a holdover from my teenage years of just abandoning shit at the first sign of discomfort or things just not going my way. And, it has some value to me during my late teens and early adulthood, but then in other ways it was really detrimental. And so, it's just learning how to incorporate that other side and leaning into that other thing. So part of it was, self-defense, and then also some of it was just having bad habits and, saying needing to have a kick in the ass to say, hey, you got to do things, you got to incorporate different ways of doing things. You can't just always decide to cut and run when shit doesn't go your way. What about you, Christine? What are any further thoughts on that?
It's funny you brought that up because, I kind of had like certain habits when I was a little bit younger that, sometimes, if certain things go bad, you just want to say, you know what, I'm going to avoid this and just, leave. But, as I'm older now, you just have to face whatever gets thrown at you in ways.
Yeah, exactly. Like I mentioned before, and then we'll move on to the next subject. And I want to talk about self-sabotage a little bit more. Hold on, sorry. I'm grabbing something real quick. Because after this is done, I'm going to be smoking a bunch more weed, so I'm just trying to get that ready. We'll cut that all out in post. But anyway.
It sounded like you were just diving into a box of Captain Crunch.
Yeah, sorry about that. But the last thing I'll say before we go into self-sabotage is, I play in a couple bands and shit, and I was organizing events at a place called Bridgetown DIY and shit, and it's like I don't want to practice. I don't want to most of the time go to rehearsal. It's like, yeah, I enjoy hanging out with my musician friends, and obviously I love once I get into it playing the music, but I've never been somebody who I could just sit around and just play guitar for 12, 14 hours or just listen to music and shit by bands for like 10, 12 hours and shit straight. It's like I like music, but I still like to be able to walk away from it and do other things that have nothing to do with music. So part of my journey and then the other thing, like with organizing events, it's like I don't always want to be hanging out at events or have to organize with people and communicate with people and make sure people return messages and shit like that. But it's like that's part of what it takes. And if I'm going to be able to get certain things done, it's like I have to be willing to accept the fact that, a lot of artists clearly don't return messages, or they show up late, or they like to get fucked up more than they should, before they go to perform and stuff. But it's just like at a certain point, I just have to accept that that's what it is, and either accept that that's how this business is and how the game goes and deal with it, or get into a different game. But to get into the next topic, self-sabotage, or the ways in which we, the ways in which we, it's self-explanatory, the ways in which we fuck up opportunities in our life. I remember earlier before I've been talking so much, do y'all have any things you'd like to say about self-sabotage?
I have a huge amount, but I definitely want to let Christine go before.
Oh no,
right,
you can go.
Sweet, and Adam's about to rejoin again pretty soon.
Marvelous. Okay, well, I guess if I'm a go, the self-sabotage has been the main antagonist of my life, from grade school to present. It really
Really?
Yes, absolutely. And the thing that's crazy about it is I didn't fully realize how much of an undercurrent it was until very, very recently, like this year.
Yeah.
I went on. This is like, it's funny and like sad and crazy at the same time. But I went on like this, like I went on a legit like booze bender one night. Like got super shit faced, and the crazy thing was I realized that I had like had this epiphany about all this this undercurrent of self-sabotage, where anytime I'd get too close to like making a really big sense of progress, I would like have to kick myself down a notch, and it had been happening at that point for over a decade. You know, I mean, like in different ways through childhood, but it ramped up to like 11 when I had failed out of a for-profit art school, the Art Institute of California, Orange County.
Oh,
it was
okay.
an incredibly expensive way to find out that I don't want to make games for a living. So, but I took that really hard, because before then, I you know, with the No Child Left Behind mentality of school and everything, I really was like, I didn't realize it, but summer schooling my way through all of my academic failures and like having no work ethic to speak of was this time bomb ready to go off. And then I went to this predatory college and just 100% fell into the mousetrap. And the problem was, the lesson I took out of it, and I didn't know this until again a friggin' decade later, the lesson I had taken out of it was this pattern of self-sabotage, of like this automatic path in my life that I thought was on a rail. Like I was like, step one, go to elementary, middle school, high school, then I'll go to this college, get a job in game design, and I'll make games and be creative, and everything will work out. And it's a very 18-year-old way of thinking, but unfortunately, like I didn't have any proper obstacles thrown in my way so that I would like crash and fall at a more appropriate time. And unfortunately, I fell at like a really costly time. And I took, like I said, subconsciously I took a really bad lesson out of it. And so I had all this decade of meandering, and that night when I had that friggin' bender, the crazy thing to me was I realized it before the bender, and the bender was like this mandatory, all right, it's time for you to hit the bottom so you can spring back up. It was conscious. It was a conscious decision. It was the strangest thing. It was so fucking weird.
Yeah, it's like you finally realize.
Yeah.
It's like really coming to grips with shit and acknowledging that, okay, I'll put it like this. So like I used to sit back earlier in my musician. Oh, Adam, by the way, he rejoined the chat, and we're just talking, we're talking about self-sabotage.
Yeah. Ooh, fun.
Yeah, and like, no, like you said, you had to learn a very valuable lesson. It took a lot of money, a lot of your time and mental space and shit, and then you had to come to this revelation, and then you realized the key thing that you said here was that it was a conscious decision. Because as an artist, and I think everybody here in this chat is a creative in some way, they create to some degree, that when people talk about inspiration, especially when we were, at least when I was younger, I thought that it was just something I would just wake up one day and I would just have it. And so so part of my self-sabotage, and part of why it took me so long to get my shit together, was I was like, I knew people who were musicians or artists who they would do pull all-nighters, or they would spend 12, 14 hours, just devoted on one thing. And I would be like, oh, my time will come. I'll wake up one day and I'll just be like that. I'll just be able to tap into that shit. Not realizing or not recognizing the fact that, okay, yeah, there are some people who just have that initiative in them, but even prodigies have to practice. Even prodigies have to rehearse. Even prodigies have to go and expose themselves to all different perspectives and way of doing things, and take the competency that they naturally have to the next level. I was foolish enough to think that I was just going to wake up one day and have inspiration and creativity foisted upon me because it would just come from the heavens. It took me later to realize, like, no, creativity and inspiration is work, and that you have to keep the pipe primed, so that way by the time you do have that random lightning in a bottle or whatever, you'll be able to capture the goddamn thing. Part of my self-sabotage was also thinking that because I never saw myself as a leader, or really never saw myself as being competent, especially competent at anything, I always felt like I had to look to somebody else for direction and wait for somebody else's cue and wait for somebody else to say, or basically just following somebody else's lead because my lead wasn't going to go anywhere. And so it's like I always had a work ethic. I could always grind and shit, but I was always grinding for somebody more so for the benefit of somebody else. And it took a while for me, of not really developing in the way that I wanted to realize like, oh shit, I've been putting so much more effort into developing shit for other people and not developing the things that I want because that would require me to actually like have to start pulling all-nighters, or that would require me to have to take more time and focus on one thing as opposed to being more scatterbrained. Which, like you said, it had to be a conscious decision. And it's almost like a switch went off, but it was a switch that was always there and that I wasn't willing to switch or willing to flip, excuse me. But since you rejoined the chat, and then we'll go to Christine, your comments on self-sabotage.
Oh, man. Yeah, I remember in high school, MI came to my school, and they were just like, yeah, like, I thought this was like an incredible school to actually go to and all that, and you're a musician and you're set for life and all that, and all these art school, all this like art schools came in and all that, and I thought like, man, like they give it, all you gotta do is just like you learn and then you're set. But in reality, they just want to take your money, and you honestly come out with nothing, and it's sad. Like in the past, like I remember I sold the guitar to this kid that came from Wyoming, and he moved to LA.
Holy shit.
And I was conversing with him like, oh, like, trying to pick up guitar. He's like, yeah, like parents gave me some money, and I'm only 19, and I really want to go to MI, and they truly believe in me. And I was just like, oh, like I was just like deep down just like, shoot, how do I do this not, and I don't know, in an honest way to not crush this kid's dreams.
Yeah.
And I told him, I gave him the honest opinion. I'm like, I guess, I mean, you could go. I mean, if your parents are paying for it, but I mean, as long as you know what you're gonna get out of it. But right. I'm just gonna tell you that, like, there's been musicians that have come out of places of Bakersfield and all these like dirt towns out in like the Midwest or whatever, and they've managed to success. In my honest opinion, like, anything is possible, but I'm just telling you from, here in LA, like, it's still competitive. It's no, for a lot of people who have glamorized that, like, LA is like the music and movie capital to like make it in. It's honestly not. It's no, you could probably have higher chances out in the middle of nowhere somewhere, and then, gain momentum there. And then, it just depends how much you put yourself out there. It's pretty much you seeing yourself as an investment and how hard you're gonna work at it. Like there's, for me, I love to write music, and I feel like it's hit me hard lately with writing, and that just comes down to just a lot of screwing up in my life, which I honestly would never take back. And that's just how art is. Like, I don't think I've ever heard of anybody's story that they've managed to succeed but not start from dirt.
Yeah, we're not even starting from dirt, but just like struggle or having to come to grips with sides of themselves that maybe as sometimes it's referred to in psychology, is that embracing your shadow or recognizing your shadow, is that you have to accept the fact that, like, no, that you, saying that you are, whatever your vices are, maybe you eat too much, or maybe you're prone to, getting too high and slacking on certain obligations, or, you're prone to, doing those things. And it's like, you shouldn't keep hiding from those things. Just accept the fact, like, okay, I do this shit. And like, okay, what are certain behaviors and mindsets and conditions that what's in my control that I can do to offset those negative behaviors instead of pretending they don't exist or that I can be above them.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think it's all timing. and maybe it's not your time yet, when you want things to fall into play. For as much as us as human beings, we try to force it like an opposite puzzle piece or whatever, but everything is all timing, and when it's meant to be, it's gonna happen. Maybe somehow the universe doesn't want you to have that, but there's gonna be something else in store for you, and that's what I've come to terms with, like with some things in life that like you want. And I mean, I don't know what other people's preferences are on that. I mean,
What about you, Christine? Self-sabotage.
Interesting. I can agree with a lot of, everybody's opinion about self-sabotage. For me, I have been through self-sabotage from teen to, I would say, mid-20s now. When I mean by the self-sabotage, I mean by behavior and opportunities. Behavior, when I was younger, I always allowed everybody to run over me. I always, I really didn't really say much, or, I just let whatever. Now I'm being a bit more vocal and being more, respectful, or say, hey, I don't like that. I'm going to put you in your place.
Right.
Opportunity, I've been kind of lucky sometimes on opportunities, because there's an old saying, opportunities only come once. In my terms, I've been lucky some opportunities have come twice. So I always try to, jump on those opportunities.
Yeah, we don't always, we get upset when things don't go our way, but then we're not always honest with if we actually prepared enough, if we actually did, met the mark of requirements, the basic requirements that it takes to get certain things done. Sometimes it can be easier to just kind of look at the way that to feel exhausted or to feel strain in doing certain things and be like, okay, I've exhausted myself, or I've expended a certain amount of energy, but not realizing that, okay, but in order to actually achieve the things that you want, you have to go past that limit. Like, you have to test your limits in that capacity. And then that's when you find out, like, okay, can you really stomach the requirements that it takes to make it in certain thing. Like what Adam was saying, we live we're relatively close to LA or whatever, it's SoCal, Hollywood and shit, and so they make billions of dollars off of that shit, of keeping people coming from all over the world, that if you can make it in that Hollywood is the place where some random motherfucker can come up and come through the ranks and shine, and saying off the merits of their art and hard work and blah 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 blah. And the thing is, it's just like, whether it's the revelations of like a Harvey Weinstein, or whether it's or whether it's seeing the intervention of like intelligence and government agencies into getting films made, basically making them like quasi propaganda, or basically just making them propaganda for a mainstream audience. Saying, or just the bullshit that successful artists in closing ranks and pulling the ladder up behind them. Saying, it's all the other bullshit that they don't tell you about. They just sell you on, no, you can come here and you're talented and make it or whatever. When the thing is, the vast majority of y'all aren't going to make it. I know a bunch of people, it's like I did the opposite after I left high school. I was living in Pomona. I was living in Chino, going to school in Pomona. And then after I went to North Carolina, most people who I talked to, of course, are like, why would you come out here from out there? I was like, because it's fucking expensive, it's hard to fucking make it, and I don't feel like I can compete right now. I don't think I actually admitted the last part, but that was deep down what I was thinking. I was like, damn, I don't know if I can really compete if I actually try to step up and put my best foot forward in this shit. And the thing is that when I look back, I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. It was just but like Dill, like you said, it was just a very expensive way to figure that shit out. That I wasn't ready. But at the same time, it's like at the same time, it's like, sometimes you need the fall really hard, or sometimes you really need a hard revelation to help you come to grips with shit and make you realign your way of thinking and your behavior. Maybe if I would have only moved one state away, or if I only would have moved like an hour away, would it have been easier for me to throw in the towel and just come back at the first sign of trouble and just fall back into the same habits that I, was trying to get away from, trying to break? Would I have gotten the same results if I only moved 2 states away? Or, it's like whatever. But I only have one life. We only have one life, and you take the lessons as you get them, and you know, hopefully there will be less self-sabotage in the future. But before moving on to the next subject, any final thoughts back to you, Dill, on it, or anybody? Self-sabotage. Moving past it, and what you're doing to curb future self-sabotage and setting yourself up for the best, to live your best life going forward.
Mine was an odd case, right? So
Mm-hmm.
with mine, again, as weird as this sounds, it was an almost literal adversarial relationship with self-sabotage, and it was like this constant undercurrent, like that's below the surface, and a lot of it is like how you talk to yourself, like having to shoot down negative self-talk is like a constant. You have to be vigilant, like because you're going to gradually steer yourself away from where you want to go, and that's what I like to this day. I always have to like catch myself, like nah, be nice, because like it has an effect. It 100% gets you down after a long time. It'd be like the same thing as having an external force be abusive for that long, but it's you.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like, you know, how some people try to diminish, like, oh, you know, how can you say online abuse or that somebody was bothering you online? Just turn it off. And it's just like, no, because those thoughts get in your head, and, you know, once things just get repeated after a while, it's like, just because of the way our brains work, you know, it just massages it. It's not even massaging it. It's it's massaging it. You're making the more that you keep certain ideas or thoughts in your head, the more that it just reinforces them just from being familiar. It's like listening to to a song that you hate 50 times, you know what I'm saying? After a certain amount of time, you're actually going to start singing along to the tune, and you'll be like, wait, I fucking hate this song. Why am I singing along with it? It's just because you got acclimated with it, and that's just how human beings are. We get acclimated to shit, even if it cuts against what we actually like or what we're actually into. And so, you know, like you just said, you have this adversarial relationship with it. I don't think that's too strange. I think a lot of people, what we have to do is accept the fact that, you know, like we get groomed, we get conditioned to thinking a certain way about ourselves and how the world works. And actually, this will tie into the next subject very well. We get conditioned into thinking the world works a certain way, and then when we get hit with the reality of it, not everybody handles it the same way. Some people are able to come, you know, from that revelation and improve their life, and some people it crushes them, and some people they get stuck in a cycle of not being able to change their bad behaviors, or always being left, you know, somebody else making decisions for them, or they just kind of go into autopilot, and you know, even though they recognize that they're not in the best, that autopilot isn't the best for them, it's like after a while you get used to it, and they believe the cost of changing things or changing course is far too expensive and far more detrimental than continuing on with things as is, you know. But moving on to the next subject real quick, it's the myth of meritocracy. Meritocracy is bullshit.
Good talk.
Good talk. But it's like in like one of the things that we talk about, like Adam mentioned earlier about like, oh, people have this idea of Hollywood and coming to Los Angeles, blah, 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 and then you come to grips with the reality, you know, or just talking to actual people who live out here, and they'll tell you how shitty it is. The same thing goes with meritocracy. We get taught that in this day and age, that, you know, as long as you work hard and as long as you show up on time and as long as you put in the extra effort and blah, 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 you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and, you know, get to the top of the ladder. And more what we discover is that, yeah, there are some cases where the people who are most qualified to be where they are actually do have their position. But even then, they're having to fend it off from motherfuckers who want to take it away for some random bullshit. It's or that there's still, you know, a lot of ceilings, you know what I'm saying, that people have to go through, whether it's a gay ceiling or a black ceiling or a woman ceiling or a trans ceiling or, you know, whatever the fuck. And there's all kinds of different colloquial names that they make up for that shit, but it's like there's boundaries, or just a poor ceiling. If you come from less money and certain social backgrounds and shit, it's also harder for you to navigate, you know, saying through certain circles, certain spaces. So it's like one of the things coming to grips with, you know, how the world works and how people are, is that we've never lived in a true meritocracy, and there will never be 100% meritocracy, because we don't just interact and engage with one another, in these dry, mechanical terms. Some people want to just look at other human beings as robots and just have fixed behaviors and expectations. But if you're somebody who recognizes just how fluid and how random and unpredictable other human beings are, then it actually becomes kind of silly to think that we live in a meritocracy, you know. But y'all's thoughts on that? The myth of meritocracy.
It's all character development.
Wait, say that again?
It's all character development, but
What you mean? Elaborate on that.
oh, I mean, I thought just like overall, I mean, it's all life experience. I mean,
But how do you feel? But how do you feel about like how we've been sold the idea of meritocracy, but then we have so much more data and information now on the disparity in everything from voting rights to access to credits and loans to how certain neighborhoods are or organized, or how, you know, political gerrymandering or anything like that. Like,
I think it's you know, since the internet has gotten way better, I mean, going back, 10, 15 years ago, like, I feel like it was a lot harder to find the answers yourself, or kind of go out and do it yourself. But, you know, now that with politics and trying to figure out what you want to do, like, you know, what you want to start, like, I feel like, yeah, it's gotten way better than ever to actually seek through other people's prefaces and blogs and, you know, etc.
Right. So I understand like what you're saying in that, okay, we're able to do better reconnaissance on one another. Like, oh, I just, you know, I have a new boss or whatever. Let me see what their Facebook is like, or their LinkedIn, or, you know, saying, let me see what the company has done before, blah, blah. I get like you saying like LinkedIn. You can do more information and everything. But what I'm talking about more so is how we've been groomed to think that we live in a meritocracy, or that there's so much more meritocracy at play than there actually is just in life, whether it's through education, whether it's through art and media, or just, you know, on the job experience of being told that, no, it's just about being hardworking and being decent and blah, blah, blah. And then only coming to find out that there were other factors at play, and just how, and maybe just kind of divulging how you kind of come to that in your own life. Just kind of like recognizing, just kind of like when you started to recognize, or the things that come to mind that made you realize that, oh, meritocracy is kind of bullshit to a certain degree. That people don't just make it because they're the smartest or the most talented or most hardworking in the room, that they usually come up for a bunch of other reasons that have nothing to do with those factors.
Shoot.
Hey, if you need more time to think about it, you can just move it to someone else.
Yeah,
no, he has to answer now. I demand it.
I'm so
dance puppet.
My brain is so fried right now.
No, it's all good. We'll go to Christine. So Christine, you know, moments in life, or just, you know, revelations that you've had about realizing like, oh, it's not actually about being the hardest working or the smartest or the most empathetic, person in the room. Sometimes it's, sometimes it's wealth, sometimes it's connection, sometimes it's just being able to, sometimes it's just having the confidence to throw your weight around and act like you know everything, and making other people look to you for direction. So kind of just, your thoughts on that, and like some of the revelations that you've had pertaining to meritocracy and whatnot.
That's quite tough, but I'm going to kind of bring up something. I don't have, the wealth or the connections. Like, I don't have any of that. I was always basically brought up that hard work basically leads you to other things. That's why I was brought up. I had kind of an old-fashioned background. I was brought up, I really looked up to my hardworking grandparents, but also the meritocracy, how you say how something can be, and then you pull the real cover. I will kind of put that towards my job as a caregiver. What nobody doesn't realize as a caregiver is you really sacrifice a lot. And by that means you're really putting your body on the line too as well. You end up getting kind of help. You kind of get health issues too as well. You sacrifice in a way kind of in your social life. So, somebody always tells me, you're so lucky to be a caregiver and all that. I bet you get so lucky. You work from home and all this stuff. And it's not all that glitters. It's not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I mentioned, this will be real quick. I mentioned to my father the other day because he was talking about caregivers and whatnot. He's like, man, bless them. It's like, how do they do all that? How do they do all that and then maintain, all a life outside of that? And I told him, I was like, they don't. I was like, a lot of them, like, your life is usually centered around your patients or around your work. You have very limited social life, and then a lot of times it's not very well paying work. So a lot of them are struggling. A lot of people who are social workers and everything also need, they're the ones who need to use social services, and oftentimes that's why they're working in that field because they recognize how important it is for somebody to maintain these institutions and resources.
Right. I want to bring up something you brought up about the amount of we being paid. You don't realize as a caregiver, because I'm hired through the state.
Mm-hmm.
We had to fight for a raise in our money. I don't know. We were 10, 20, and then we were 10. Like every year, it would go up to 25 cents. So, we paid $11.25 an hour. Just recently, a bill got signed in, and the bill got signed in January. So now we're up to 13 an hour. So we had to fight. I mean, we were lucky to get maybe 50 cents if you were a raise, but most of the time it was always a quarter. So
wait a minute. Isn't the actual minimum wage like $15 or $14 right now?
No, I'm actually getting paid 13. But the taxes and everything else that get taken off.
It depends on the county, Samboy.
Depends on the county. Like like San Francisco, like up north, they get paid $15 an hour.
That's still, oh my God.
It's not statewide yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's what
it's by county.
Okay, that was my mistake.
Right.
Wow, that's fucking nuts. No, but absolutely. I didn't know it was that low.
Oh yeah. But also different states too. Sometimes you don't get paid $9. It depends on the state too as well and their programs. So caregivers, if you're hired through your state, you get. It depends on the wage. Sometimes you can get high, sometimes you can get very low paying.
That's so criminal. And the thing is that and I'll hand it over to Dill to talk about meritocracy bullshit in just a second. But the analogy I wanted to make real quick is that I served tables for a long time. And it was the only time I served tables when I was in North Carolina. Now the rules out there, they're a right to work state, which basically means that they don't have to have a real reason to want to fire you. It could be like, oh, you looked at me wrong, or you stepped on my shoe and didn't say anything, or blah, 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 right? They can use any fucking reason to fire you. And then another thing that's a part of that state with that is if you make your wages through tips, then they can legally pay you below the state minimum wage. Now, mind you, the state minimum wage in North Carolina was already like $5 or $6 something, right? That's the state minimum wage. They legally paid us $2.13 an hour. And, and it's just like good luck after that. And then to even get food stamps, you have to already be employed or have a child. So if you don't already have a source of income, then you don't even have access to the social services that are available to help you just maintain in the fucking society. So I definitely understand what you're saying about like different states and counties and how different rules. It's just like, I hate the fact that there are certain things that are not done in a federal way, in a standardized way, that certain states and counties get to do their shit, any fucking way they want to. But Dylan, your contributions on the myth of meritocracy and recognizing that sometimes the people who have positions of power, didn't get there through quote unquote righteous means, or they didn't quote unquote earn it.
You almost started a states' rights discussion there.
That's why I skirt. That's why I skirt. I know.
Skirting the line, dude.
That's why I'm skirting right away. But the thing is that it's just like, like I said, there's no one
or way.
Well, the thing is that there's no one. Like I said, human beings, we don't live in terms of one philosophy or one idea.
It's all good.
Like that.
It's all good. I'm teasing you. Yeah, as far as meritocracy goes, I don't think it's. I disagree with you slightly, in that I don't think meritocracy is dead or a false concept. I think that it's not sufficient by itself.
Well, what
you were arguing?
Well, what I was saying is that it's oversold. So it's not as.
All right, I'll just say my piece.
So there's other factors that go. Basically, what I'm saying isn't so much that you'll never get anywhere on your merit, or most people don't get anywhere because of their hard work. What I'm saying is that oftentimes there's a lot of other factors that go into besides merit, and that sometimes it's the things that aren't merit that override, or that there are certain things that override merit.
Okay, let me just come out with it. I think it's a 50-50 mix. I think half of it has to be your work ethic, so the meritocracy. The other half has to be how sociable you are, or how widespread you can be. You know, how you can network yourself. Yeah. And I can't speak from experience because I'm trying to do that. I mentioned at the very beginning of this that I'm a Twitch streamer, and I'm awful at marketing. I'm friggin' garbage. I don't know what I'm doing. But I can recognize when other people are, and they're doing the work for marketing and for the content itself, and through that marketing being personable and being present, you know. And I think almost unilaterally, whatever business you're in, whatever sort of industry, you have to have both. You have to be sociable. You have to get along with people. It's very, very difficult to be some sort of woodcutter in the middle of the Appalachia and like have a crazy stock portfolio. You know, like you have to have both.
Right. You have to work with people, and the thing is, like, excuse me, is that, like, I was talking, the same woman who I mentioned earlier, who I used to date or whatever, and we chat. She works at a big corporation or whatever, and she's an assistant in a creative department. And one of the things that she related was how she gets along with everybody around, but that she's not really included in, like the social stuff. And she's like, at first she was like, well, I don't really want to do it, but that she starts to recognize that, okay, that my skills and my talent and my work are only going to get me so far, and that I have to start schmoozing a little more. And I was basically right there with her, and I was just like, yeah, you kind of have to put yourself out there to be like, hey, even though deep down you don't really want to hang out with people, or that you don't really want to engage in that conversation, it's like trying to find a way in which you can be engaged and interact with people to that extra degree, so that way you can supplement your merit and be like, wow, you know what, so-and-so is a hard worker, and I really like them, and I really get along with them, or that they seem really cool, and we can put them in different situations. Like, hey, what about you coming, you have dinner, we're going to be talking with, such and such, who work over at these offices, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, and it's not inherently negative. It really isn't, because it's straight up, you could have all the talent in the world, and you could have a prospective audience, but neither of those things are going to go down if one party doesn't find the other. Like it's a weird slant, because marketing has like such a negative, like, trickery. What horrible wizardry is advertising going to try to convince me to do next?
Manipulation,
yeah, it has a manipulative slant to it, and a lot of that's deserved. But pragmatically speaking, if you have something that someone else could get a use out of, and that you want to give, like you have a service or a talent, or music. If you have this music, and there's someone in like Egypt or somewhere who's just never going to hear about you, you can make their life better by sharing your gift with them. But that's not going to happen unless you do that necessary evil of spreading yourself out there through whatever means, in our information age, globalized world.
Well, and the thing is, I completely agree with you. But the thing is, just also take note of the way that you framed it. Is that you said, like, doing the necessary evil. Is that it's kind of like with the power conversation we had earlier. Is that we tend to frame these things as being good or inherently good or bad, when it's just like, no, it comes down to how you use it.
Oh yeah, like I said, I struggle with that. I'm bad at marketing. I'm not good. I didn't lead with the name of my channel. Like, that's yeah, you see what I'm getting at? I'm bad at this.
Yeah. No, I
said
get
I'm a Twitch streamer.
That, like, I also understand.
Yeah.
I also get where you're coming from, because, like I said, we grow up being conditioned to think, like you said earlier with manipulation, like we grow up thinking like, oh, marketing is manipulation, and just like we get taught to think oftentimes, oh, government is automatically evil or automatically authoritarian. And it's like, no, it's not. None of these things are 100% this or that. It's that marketing is a way for people who normally wouldn't find you and normally wouldn't be able to deeply invest in your shit, to kind of get a brief 10 to 15 second introduction to what you are, and then hopefully be hooked or not. Because the thing is, there's always going to be, you can only develop that deep bond, that really personable, intimate relationship with people to only so many people. But the thing is that, like, if you want to expand and have that availability, or be accessible to other people outside that intimate circle, then you have to be able to, like you said, stretch yourself out and market and be able to present yourself in a way that somebody who only has 10 seconds to dedicate to you, or hell, even 5 or 7 seconds, can be hooked on your shit. As opposed to thinking, no, you have to sit through, my 3-hour podcast in full. Otherwise you're not really down, and you don't, and you're not a real fan. It's like, no, fuck that shit. But let's go back to Adam, because he didn't. Let's go back to Adam and talking about like meritocracy and the limitations of it, and how you have to look beyond, and how also we have to stop framing stuff that isn't about meritocracy. Is that we have to stop putting meritocracy in and of itself on a pedestal, and that we have to stop demonizing other shit besides meritocracy, because any one of us would use our relation to one another to give ourselves an advantage, in a situation. Oh, hey, I didn't realize, hey, did you want to come up in line with me? And no, it's fine. Don't worry about them. You can come in line up here with me. Or if somebody says they're like, oh, I really need some extra toilet paper and I can't find any in the store, it's like, hey, you can come cop some from me, or whatever the fuck. We're going to use our relationships. We're going to use other stuff besides merit. It's just about putting things in perspective and recognizing the limitations of it. So would you like to make a few comments on that?
I mean, I don't know if this is, relating to it, but like how you said, like with being kindness and all that, but, I've seen that some restaurants actually offer, I guess when you, supporting small businesses, they'll actually give you a free roll of toilet paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's just like trying to find alternatives in that way of, I don't know
I hear what you're getting at, in that restaurants are, in one way they're trying to distinguish themselves and keep themselves relevant in conversation, is being like, because a lot of restaurants aren't operating, or there are some ones that are strictly doing drive-through, but it's like there's still a lot of stiff competition for that. So then what's one way that you can sweeten the deal or kind of help spread your name, is being like, yo, there's 5 or 6 restaurants on this block, but this is the only one that's offering toilet paper with each purchase and shit. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So it's like so the thing is, I get what you're saying, is that it's operating with the sense that you can't just think like, oh, our food is good and we've gotten good reviews and this particular critic likes us, so then everybody should just naturally find us. And it's like, that's not how it works. People, you don't know what way people are going to find you. That's why if you go into your analytics, if you go into like your analytics on YouTube or whatever, streaming service or whatever, it'll break down to you what age groups tend to listen to you. It'll break down what days and what time of days people tend to listen to you. It'll break down how long people visit, listen to you, what devices, and, what country and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, this is all telling you where and how people are finding your shit. So that way you can continue to fine tune the way that you present your stuff and what topics you discuss and how you do it to help engage with your respective audience more, or disengage if you find that you're attracting the wrong kinds of people. Either way. So no, it does fit, because I was just talking about how we need to look beyond just, meritocracy, and not always look at meritocracy in and of itself as a good thing, and not always look at like, nepotism or other things that don't have anything to do with meritocracy as inherently bad. But yeah, we're closing in on 3 hours, so we'll just kind of cut to like the last couple topics. So another thing I wanted to talk about is, and this will relate back to like the coronavirus and shit, is that be wary of, because I've been seeing a bunch of memes and people talking about like, oh, because human industry has taken a hit and we've cut back on a lot of production and doing the shit we normally do, like, oh, the water is cleaner and the sky is clearer and less allergies and shit like that for people. And it's like, yes, that is a good consequence. And then some people are saying, or I'm seeing, some posts, some people saying that like, oh, corona isn't the disease, human beings are the disease. See how the world would be without us? It's like, look, human beings are not a disease. We can organize our way to do things. Yeah, there's always going to be waste, and there's always going to be waste associated with us. I mean, until every individual dies, there's always going to be runoff and bullshit like that. But we can already reduce the way that we consume, and we can already change the way we do this shit. And by the way, don't ever let somebody use this shit to get you down, because the vast majority of pollution in this fucking world is created by less than like half a dozen companies around the fucking world.
Yeah.
Okay, so if these people are talking about, the water's so clean and the air's so clean, it's like, human beings are the disease. No, these greedy fucking capitalists and these greedy fucking people who run these factories and these sweatshops who don't want to change shit and improve conditions and make things better for people because that would cut their margins. No, they are the fucking disease. And if you want to say somebody doesn't deserve to fucking exist, they're the motherfuckers that don't.
Yeah.
Because go ahead.
Oh, no, I was thinking about the other day how a lot of people who have to work at home and all that, if that might play a role after this, that maybe, this might reduce, people working maybe 3 to 4 days out of the week instead of 5, kind of, limiting, if it's possible that like, people that are adapting to working at home, if that's going to be the fact, then I mean, just thinking out loud, but
yeah,
I wouldn't mind, like, if like for these people that, say for instance, like they make, $20 an hour, but after all this, if they told me like, oh, well, you can actually work at home, and I mean, you can, come into the office 2 days out of the week, but we're going to take, we're going to cut your check by $2 to $3.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind. I honestly, truly wouldn't mind, saving gas and, carbon footprint. Like that would make a huge change in our habits and, helping out with climate, reducing climate change.
No, I absolutely agree. The only problem with that is that the people who can work from home, those jobs, it's already so small. Like most people, most jobs require people to be on site because just because of the way our economy is structured. Like we have a consumer society, society. And so it's like, I think it's over like 70% base consumption, which means we need people out, buying furniture. We need people out, buying new phones. We need people out buying this shit. And it's like, yeah, more people are buying stuff online, but the vast majority of purchases and shit still happen face to face. And most transactions happen face to face. And so what this whole crisis has shown is that so much of our economy is redundant and decades behind, because a truly efficient economy would, have the means to be able to take care of their people and allow them to still be productive in the midst of this crisis. And so the thing is, I completely agree that like if I could do my job from home and they pay me, the same or just a little bit less, or maybe I have less hours, I'm like, fuck yeah, I would do that and just try to make up that income doing other shit, probably focusing more on my creative, which I'm doing right now, because the thing is, like the whole example I gave of people who repeat stuff like that, even if they don't necessarily know it, what they're repeating is the philosophy of eugenics and ecofascism. Now, what that means, if eugenics, for those that don't know, it's basically treating human beings like plants and like animals, like, oh, we can breed certain traits and certain behaviors and stuff out, which is like, when people's groups mix, skin tone and hair and, different predispositions to diseases, that's all, that's all very real, and actually happens. But eugenics was specifically designed because it was designed by Western Europeans at first to designate Eastern Europeans. Because they'd be like, oh, their tongue, their language or whatever, their religion or their social practices made them inferior to the more quote unquote enlightened Western Europeans. And then basically as Western Europe started to colonize the world, they just applied the same thinking to every other group of people they came to interact with. And so, eugenics is basically just the philosophy that there are certain behaviors like, criminality or intelligence or morality that can be literally bred out. And so eugenics was the basis of the Atlantic slave trade. It was the basis of the Holocaust. It was the basis of, even Stalin implemented that shit to a certain degree. Because it's the belief that certain elements that they can either be bred out or that you have to completely exterminate a group of people because behaviors you don't think behaviors happen at an individual level. You think they happen at a group level. And then ecofascism, which is just adding eco as in ecology, and fascism is basically like the people who recognize that the environment is doing better and that the way that we live is detrimental to the ecological system, but that their solution to it is fascism, or in other words, that a certain number of people and types of people need to perish in order for the prosperity of a select group of motherfuckers. So it's like, be wary of that, because that person, whether they're who's repeating that shit, they may or may not be aware of it, that they're repeating that shit. That basically what they're saying is that, oh, some people deserve to die because some people deserve to die for the benefit of other people because the way that they behave or the way that they act or think is inherently inferior and needs to be disposed of. Let's go to Christine first.
Wow, to think of something, tell that to my allergies, for people to say, oh, the air cleaner and all this stuff, because my allergies are not having it right now when it comes to the air. But I'm gonna have a mixed answer on that one, because I feel maybe both parties are to blame. I've been seeing pictures all over the internet, how there's people are saying, oh, look at the water's clean, or, the air, the pollution, I'm very mixed. I would say everybody plays a part and a role. Everybody.
Right. But I mean, the thing is that like it is weighted differently. So like, so kind of like with the stimulus bill that was passed, right? It's like, yeah, there's shitty Democrats and Republicans, but it was the Republicans that were primarily trying to give the benefits to like Trump's businesses and to more breaks for the wealthy and big businesses and shit and blah blah blah. So it's like, so in this situation, it's like I said earlier, is that while individual people, we could be better about using renewable sources of energy and shit like that. But the thing is, we're not responsible for creating that shit. Most people nobody creates the cars that they use. Nobody mines the oil and petroleum that we put in our cars. We get that shit from these corporations, which I think it's like 7 or 8 corporations around the world that are responsible for like almost half of the pollution. So the thing is, if we would get these major corporations to just reform their shit, that would take care of more pollution than individuals could do all around the world.
Absolutely. Let those corporations take the responsibility.
Yeah.
They need to be responsible for their actions.
Right, because that's what enables other human beings, that's what enables individuals to be able to do right. Because if Teslas were as readily available as Honda Civics, there'd be a lot more Teslas on the road around the world. But for multiple reasons, that isn't the case. And, it's why there's still so many cars. I mean, hell, the car that I drive is over 20 plus years. You know what I'm saying? I know it's not the most efficient shit, but it's like, it's what I could afford at the time and it's still kicking. So I'm going to keep using it, even though I know it's worse for the environment in the long run. But what about you? What about you, Adam? Your thoughts on that conversation of seeing those posts and seeing the getting a glimmer of how things could be different, but then also not justifying it for the wrong reasons.
I mean, just going way back, it's like change, like from going back to normal, like this has to change. I mean, like I guess you do see results in a way, but I mean, it's so easy to slip back, like people still falling into consumerism and all that.
Yeah, because I mean the thing is, we only consume what is made available to us.
Yeah.
Because we don't. Most people don't get to farm or create the shit that they have. Most people don't have access to the resources, which is why a motherfucker like me is like, the workers, citizens, should own, like, utilities should be nationalized. There should be no private utilities, at least not to a certain degree, at least. Yeah. In my mind. But yeah, what about you, Dill? And seeing people talk about like, basically coming to the wrong conclusion, or not. I don't want to weight it down like that, but people. But what are your thoughts on that shit of like ecofascism and eugenics and related to like disease and that was the thing I left out, is that with that shit, some people are seeing the coronavirus as a blessing because they're like, we should just allow a certain amount of people to die because like, oh, when the black plague hit Europe, that decimated an entire class, and it allowed certain groups of people to come up because there was no more competition in town. I've been seeing a lot more people who have those kind of cynical takes, and not even always just right-wing people, but just also left-wing people who are just like, look, we need a certain number of people to die off because that'll make the system more efficient. And the thing is, if you pay attention to what's happening in these hospitals and shit, you would know that's the complete opposite effect that it's having. So would you like to elaborate a little more, Dill?
Yeah, I'm gonna tackle that one directly. When people say that if, you know, X number of people would die, the world would be better, they're not fucking talking about themselves or their family. They have someone else in mind.
It's always somebody else. It's never me or my family. For some reason, everybody who says that shit, no matter how low on the totem pole they are, they always see themselves and their people as the exceptions to the rule.
Yeah, and that's why that line of thinking is ultimately flawed and immediately flawed, because they're not thinking it through, and they're not taking in the full repercussions of what that thinking is. And then that sort of language too is really bad, because anything that lowers a human being to being less than a human being, you know, if you say, oh, people are a disease, again, they're not talking about themselves. They don't think of themselves as a disease. They're thinking of someone else, someone specific. And so, like I said, that sort of like language, you know, like you want to be romantic about it and see this beautiful earth, but like that shit gets people killed.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually goes into one more thing. I think we'll get into the last two topics. The last topic, just to kind of get it in y'all's minds, is the fact that voting will not save us. Voting alone cannot save us in these situations, although it is still important to vote. That'll be the last topic. But the topic I want to get into right now is, I want to talk about, actually I lied, we'll do three subjects. The last one will be voting will not save us. The second one will be individuals versus institutions. And the one that we'll get into right now that's still kind of on the back of the last thing is the romanticization of nativism or primitivism. So there's, along with that, like, you know, people talking about, oh, human beings are disease, or that we need to revert back to, you know, life being having less technology, or going back to the way things used to be in some imagined primitive paradise where there was less technology and less medicine and shit like that. It's like, the thing that people don't accept is that, you know, part of the reason why human beings have been able to become what we are is because of how much we adapt to our situations and make the most of whatever's there. And so motherfuckers talk about like, oh, you know, life was so much more simpler before we had microwaves, or before we had, you know, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, you're not considering the fact that tons of people were dying from all kinds of diseases that we have vaccines for, shit that you're vaccinated for. You know what I'm saying? You know, people imagine themselves as being more ready for the collapse of society, or for things to revert back when there was less technology, than they actually are. Like, most motherfuckers, if you told them that they couldn't use cars, automobiles anymore tomorrow, and that they would just have to go back to using bikes and shit, yeah, they would be cool for like a week. And then they would have to, and then they would be talking about, damn, I have to make multiple trips to go to the grocery store, or, you know, or whatever kind of bullshit. Like, people don't really take they over-romanticize this idea that, oh, if I go and live off the grid, that's probably the biggest thing that I've encountered. I've encountered a lot of people who talk about, oh, I want to live off the grid and just be by myself, and, you know, blah, 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 blah.
They see it in the movies, and they think it's all that, it's romanticized.
Yeah, it's this kitschy idea of that, oh, these people were able to live this life, and that it's the I forget what the term is, but, and it's almost always with men, but it's this idea that, oh, I can be the everyman, that I can be, you know, super strong and super agile and super intelligent and super resourceful, and I can handle all of this shit. You know what I'm saying? And then you never take into account, what if you get a fucking stomach flu? What if you eat some bad food? What if you know what I'm saying, you get you break a leg, or you fall unconscious and shit, and you're the only person around for 30 miles.
That's legit the plot of Into the Wild.
Yeah, Into the Wild, was that the one with Leo?
No, this one's older. I just looked it up. It's 2007 film.
Oh, okay.
It's a guy having that faulty line of thinking of just like more pure. But his problem, his ultimate, I guess I'll spoil it for you. His ultimate downfall is he's not properly prepared, and he doesn't adapt. Like he eats some bad food, and just like that thing you were like joking about is legit how the film ends. Is a guy eats a bad pair of food, a bad batch of food, and like gets paralyzed and starves to death. It's messed.
Ugh.
Yeah.
And the thing is that like you don't even have to go off the grid for that shit to happen. There are people who don't get found for weeks or months who live in these condominiums, who live in these apartments that have dozens or hundreds of people living in them. So it's very easy to just fall off or just have something happen to you, and other human beings not even be able to come and assist you. And then it's like you want to make it harder for them because you have this, kitschy notion, this cute notion that somehow that the trappings of society are so overwhelming that you would be better off. And the thing is, look, I'm not a city person. I've never enjoyed like really being in the city unless I absolutely have to. It's just too much for me. I like being in more low-key settings. But once again, I accept the trade-off with that. I accept the fact that being further away from the center of shit means that when it comes time for me to actually want to use that stuff, it's going to be a little more out of reach. It's going to take a little more effort to get to it. But it's like I accept that. And if I were to go, suddenly go up and get into the woods, I would definitely be getting a lot more prepared than a lot of these motherfuckers who profess to be so ready for it would. What about you, Christine or Adam? Any further thoughts?
I love camping, but if it came down to that stream, that is a bigger challenge, and it's thinking about you have to be thinking about your next meal, and I think that's really shitty.
Yeah.
It's hard, but it's just if it has to come down to those circumstances, but I don't think there's anything glamorous about that.
Right.
Trying to figure out a way to capture water, fighting off animals.
Yeah, diseases and all that other shit. What about you, Christine? Any thoughts before we move on to the next one?
Well, it's going to be kind of simple. I think it just depends on the circumstance of the situation that we're put in. That's how I would put this as. Like put it, like right now we're all being, to our homes, and some people are okay with it, and then some people are just not. They're not heeding words, so to speak.
Yeah, true that for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so we move on to the second to last topic, which is individuals versus institutions.